The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Today we're going to be talking about a book which has just come out, and it's called A Convenient Man, and I have both authors with me today, and it's revolving around the 1957 murder of Maria Ridulph, which we've covered a few times before. So here we go. We've got Dennis Tomlinson and Jeffrey Dean Doty. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's just introduce you to the audience. So first of all, Jeffrey, maybe give a little bit about your history and how you got into this case.
Well, this is actually my second book on the case, but the first one was more about how I discovered that a man had been wrongfully imprisoned. This one is more in depth on how how the investigation went bad, basically. And I got interested in this because I knew two of the attorneys that were involved in this case during Jack McCullough's prosecution and defense. I knew one of the prosecutors, Victor Escarceta, and I knew the public defender who represented him, Tom McCullough.
Right.
They were friends, and we started talking about the case, and I really wasn't all that interested in writing about it until I discovered it was the oldest cold case in U.S. history ever to successfully go to trial, and the history buff in me is what took over then.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Now, let's go to Dennis. Let's talk about you and how you got involved.
Well, I'll go back to my birth. I was born in Sycamore, which was the city, or actually the small town where the crime occurred. Grew up nearby, and to this day I probably have 2 or 3 memories related to this. And I really can't say that I paid an awful lot of attention to it through my life, other than the fact that I was aware of it. Everyone was aware of it because life changed after this happened, not in a good way for the little kids. I think I was re-interested in it in 2012 when I heard about a person being convicted. And my first thought was, oh, they convicted a guy in this, and it's all these years later. That's wonderful. And then Jeff told me, because Jeff and I have known each other for a long time, Jeff told me he was writing a book about it. So when his book came out, I bought it and I read it. And I promptly decided that he must have something wrong because his conclusion is different than what the investigators and the prosecution and the trial had determined. So I also read the other book that came out about this, Footsteps in the Snow, which was very much pro-investigators and pro-prosecutors, and watched the documentary that was made based on that other book. And I also got involved with Casey Porter, who I'm sure you're aware is Jack McCullough's son-in-law, and through his website started exchanging emails and messages with him about the case. And of course, he's a very strong advocate for his father-in-law, Jack, that he didn't do this. So he kept trying to convince me. So ultimately, I got to a point where I looked at the prosecution's theory of the crime, tried to make sense out of it. I couldn't. By trade, I'm an engineer, so my next step was to look at everything that didn't fit and try to tweak it in a way that made things start falling into place. And quite frankly, the more I tweaked it, the more absurd the story became. So eventually I got to the point where I just threw my palms to the air and said, Casey is right. Jeff is right. And so I kept watching this case as it went through the appeals process. And when the appeal process was resolved or maintained that Jack McCullough's murder charge stayed in effect, I started thinking that this story is going on. This is continuing from from Jeff's book and from all other reporting that had gone on. So I started thinking another book is needed. And that's how I got to the level of trying to get someone, because I'm not capable of writing a book on my own, of trying to recruit somebody to write a book with me. And that someone turned out to be Jeff after quite a bit of coaxing, which I'm sure Jeff would like to. Yeah, Jeff would probably do a better job of describing than I would, because he didn't say yes right away. In fact, he didn't say yes for the first few times I asked. I think it was only a result of my pestering that he finally relented. And
yeah,
said, okay,
I think it took like 3 months of pestering before I finally gave in. I kept telling him, why don't you write it and I'll edit it for you. And he insisted, I'm not a writer, you're the writer, so you write it, I'll do all the research. And that's when we came to our collaboration.
So when you did this, you must have both been on the same mindset of where you want it to go with this book and kind of what you want it to get across to people. So whoever wants to answer this can, but so if someone picks up your book and reads it, and after they've finished reading it, what do you want them to walk away with? What's the key item that you think is important?
I think the key item is to understand how much power the police and prosecutors have with no real repercussions. I mean, there have been lawsuits in this case, which they have settled. But as far as the police officers and the original investigators and the prosecutors, it's no skin off their nose because the government bodies pay for it all. And they walk away scot-free. I think that's just wrong because there's no accountability then. And I think that's where the true message of this is when you have people with that much power, the power to shape a story any way they want to, whether it's fits the facts or not, and get away with it, there's nothing to stop anyone from doing it again. We really need to address that. And I think most of the people that read the book, from what I'm hearing, they're very outraged. And I think rightfully so.
I would agree with that. I think outrage would be the desired result, succinctly. Well,
so what exactly do you think should happen to the police? Like, where do you want to go with this? As in, and what exactly is the level of where they should be held accountable personally? So, for instance, so if a police detective just makes a mistake and they convict someone wrong just from faulty police work?
Yeah, honest mistakes should not be punished. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. Yeah, but what I think is when you go to the point that you're trying to hide the truth, not only from judges, from jurors, you're trying to hide the truth from the defendants, and the defense itself, then you're crossing a line. And when you can change the date, like the original crime, as near as we've been able to pin down, happened between 6:45 p.m. and 6:55 p.m. on December 3rd, 1957. And they changed the date of the crime to sometime shortly after 6 o'clock, between 6 and 6:20, in order to make it possible for the crime to fit Jack McCullough. Not because that's what the facts were, because the facts absolutely show that it did not happen then. And then he had an eyewitness that supported his alibi, and they hid that. They reported her answers to their questions as being the opposite of what she said. His girlfriend verified that he made their date that night, And they said that she said he never showed up. And they hid her from the defense. They told the defense at one point that they decided not to call her to before the judge to put her on the stand, and so they sent her home. And the truth is, they didn't send her home until 6 days after the trial was over. So these are serious crimes. And they'll never be held accountable for that. A man lost 5 years of his life at the age of 72 behind bars because of what? Because they were ambitious? Because they felt he was guilty? That's not a reason. The thing that people have to understand as public servants in the justice system is the citizens don't pay you to find a criminal. They pay you to find the right criminal.
Yeah, we have no doubt that the investigators very early in their investigation decided that Jack McCullough was their guy, and that nothing that came up that looked exculpatory was going to steer them away from that course. Everything that came up that indicated that McCullough might not be the guy just became an obstacle to be worked around, not something that was going to cause them to stop and reevaluate and say, I don't think he did this. In particular, when 2 years into the investigation, when they got the old ancient FBI reports, they had the entire story in front of them. This was back in 2010, 2 years before the trial. They had all the interviews that showed what time the abduction took place, and they had John Tessier, which was Jack's name at the time. They had all the specifics of his alibi, the alibi that had satisfied the FBI, and told him that you're fine, you can go away now. You can go. He was going to enlist in the Air Force, and they told him after the investigation that you didn't do it. And yet here he was all these years later, being charged and tried for it again.
Yeah, all they had to do was wait for all his alibi witnesses to die, or, develop Alzheimer's and forget, and they were able to charge him at will.
So when we look at the people that brought it back into the attention of the police, is stepsisters or half-sisters?
Yeah, his half-siblings.
What's your opinion on them? Like they were pretty doggedly, they really pursued this with several policing agencies until they got it to where he was, arrested and tried. And it took them quite a bit. What's your opinion on them and why? And why were they so convinced of his guilt?
Well, I think part of it may have been adult sibling rivalry. As you mentioned, they were half siblings. They had a different father, and Jack, from everything we hear from the Tessier family, Jack was pretty well protected by his mother, and so they felt that he got away with everything. And I think they came to the conclusion that, he may have done this for whatever reason that they believe this. And so they just felt that he was getting away with yet something else, but on a much larger scale, getting away with murder, literally. And so they wanted to, see him finally what they would have felt is justifiably punished. There's certainly a great deal of animosity in that family. To say it's dysfunctional, it would be an understatement.
I just wonder if, could this be really a result as if from the one sister accusing him of raping her and sexually assaulting her?
Yeah, an interesting note on that. When the first trial that Jack had to go through was a rape trial with those accusations that he had raped his sister. And he was acquitted of that, and I think with good cause. There really wasn't any evidence that of any rape. They could find no witnesses. They could find nothing to support it. And Jack's attorney at that time, Regina Harris, made an interesting observation to me. She said that she found it interesting that his sister Jean had said that she had experienced every single type of rape, just shy of rape murder. And she was a rape counselor. And so while she didn't say anything, I was left with the feeling that she thought maybe she was padding her resume. But we don't know. And nobody will ever know the truth of that. I mean, Jack always denied it. His sister always said it was so. But I don't know if this is a continuation of the sibling rivalry, if it's bitter feelings, or if it actually happened. We'll never know.
Yeah, I think I remember him sort of admitting to being fooling around with her, but
yeah.
So that in itself, this could be. I'm not even going to go into the details, but what I'm saying is this could, in a way, be kind of their get back at him, like they tried to do something to him years ago. He got acquitted. This might just be kind of their anger at him.
It certainly probably, yeah, I would say it certainly is. There's definite animosity there. Jack, I spoke with Jack the other night, and he mentioned that one of the things that hurt him most deeply was when he was sentenced, or when he was found guilty of the kidnapping murder of Maria Ridulph. His entire family stood up and cheered like a touchdown had just been scored in the big game.
What's your opinion then of Kathy Sigman, the eyewitness? You know, because it took her a long time, and then her memory was from years ago and all that, but she was kind of a key witness in there. So do you have a feeling about her in any sort of light?
I think she was an innocent in this. I think she was highly manipulated by the police, and they gave her a loaded picture lineup for her to look at. She received 6 pictures to look at, and in those pictures, 5 of them were from a high school yearbook, and they all had the light background, and all of the people in those pictures were looking up and away from the camera. They all were wearing nice suit and tie. And then the picture that they showed her of Jack was a dark, rainy picture taken obviously at a nightclub, and he doesn't have the full suit on, and he's the only one that's looking straight out at the camera. And during her process of going through it, she used a process of elimination in order to arrive. The way eyewitness IDs are done today. Dennis can tell you.
Yeah, that's a very bad process to allow. She was allowed to actually look at the remaining 3. She'd eliminated 3 during what's called a sequential pass, the first time through sequential pass. And then there were 3 remaining pictures, and they were all laid down side by side. And she was allowed to look at all 3 of those, and then eliminate one, and then stared at Jack's, and then one other picture for we don't know exactly how long, perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute, before she said it was Jack. That is a relative comparison, and it's basically asking the eyewitness which one of these looks most like your memory of what the perpetrator looked like, as opposed to asking them, are any of these pictures the perpetrator? And there's a very big difference between those two. There's a lot of mistaken eyewitness identifications that happen because of this side-by-side comparison. In fact, in many states, that's illegal anymore. And I think in Illinois, as of maybe
January of 2016.
16, okay. That's no longer illegal in Illinois either. It's also no longer in Illinois for the police officer conducting the eyewitness procedure to know who the suspect is.
And in this case, Hanley, who was the lead detective on it, was the one that presented it to her, and he knew exactly who the witness was. And they have found in countless studies that when the police officer knows who the suspect is, they give off subliminal cues. You know, maybe they hesitate a little longer laying down that one or picking it up. You know, whatever. They're nonverbal cues, but it does heavily influence the witness.
Yeah, this eyewitness procedure was not recorded, either video or audio. As far as we know, there were no pictures because nothing was ever turned over to the defense on discovery. And that, too, is also bad procedure. The obvious reasons why the defense would want to see a recording of the eyewitness procedure is to see that the procedure was followed in a scientifically approved way. This one wasn't. And in fact, Jeff said earlier that he thinks Kathy was manipulated. We know that Kathy made a mistake because we know where John Tessier was at the time of the crime, and he wasn't there. So it was a mistaken eyewitness identification, and whether Hanley influenced her that decision, it sure strongly feels like it is, but we'll never know the specifics because we have no recording.
Were you guys able to talk to Kathy this time around when you were writing the book?
No. They when I talked to her before, while I was writing Piggyback, the first book, and after I came out with my conclusions that Jack was innocent in Piggyback, I really have had no significant contact with the Chapmans, and they have made it clear that Kathy and her husband Mike want nothing to do with any further interviews on the case by anybody.
So Dennis, you said you were born there, Sycamore.
Right.
Were you living there at the time that all of this happened in 1957?
I was living in a small town 8 miles away. That town is Genoa. It's 8 miles to the north of Sycamore. So I was aware, I think probably the following morning, my mother probably told me. I have several cousins who were living there at the time. One cousin who was even a classmate of Maria Ridulph's at the time. But other cousins who knew the principals, both the Tessiers and the Ridulphs knew Maria, and other significant players in this story. And I interviewed pretty much all of them to get whatever I could from them.
Well, I was going to say, what was the general impression of Jack back then? So when it happened in 57, how was he thought of in the town?
He was thought of as kind of an odd duck. He was somewhat of a loner. He only had a couple of close friends. He was involved with a couple of clubs at school, but even then, he really, according to him, he only had 2 close friends, and that pretty much is supported by everything that we've heard.
Yeah.
He was often thought of as being a bit odd.
And one of those close friends, I won't say the name, but one of those close friends was sent to Stateville Prison the following year for attempted molestation of a young girl. So that's sort of an indication of what his friends. I think the other friend was probably a better guy.
Yeah, that's the impression I've got. He hung out with one guy that was a ne'er-do-well and one guy that was a little bit of a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
What made them, the police, pick him and kind of focus on him originally? Like, what was it about Jack that they picked up on?
Well,
they didn't really pick up on him. It was during a neighborhood sweep by the FBI when they knocked on the door at the Tessier's house. They were told by his parents that we have an 18-year-old son whose description roughly matches the description in the local newspaper, and his name is John. So he became a suspect right then and there. So we have reasonable confidence that Jack's father, Ralph Tessier, knew the chief of police, and the chief of police almost certainly knew the members of the Tessier family, including John, and he never referred John as a suspect. We have reason to believe that Ralph was well known by the county police out there, whose office was also in Sycamore, and they never recommended any of the Tessier people. And of course, these people were referring all sorts of potential suspects to the FBI, but they never recommended John Tessier. So John became a suspect when the FBI just stopped by and knocked on the door to do a search and to question anyone who lived there who may have anything to contribute to their investigation.
No, they did not.
No. They thought they had one a few days afterwards, but Kathy Sigman failed to identify him, and eventually the case against him, that person, never developed.
Yeah, they had no physical evidence because the only thing they really could have gotten physical evidence from, which was Maria's doll, which they knew this guy had handled, was passed around among so many people that it became impossible to get a clean fingerprint off of it. It became useless as evidence, so they had no physical evidence. All they had is one eyewitness, Kathy, and most detectives that I know have said that, after about 2 weeks, eyewitnesses are absolutely useless. Mm-hmm. Which, when you think that they used Kathy as an eyewitness 55 years later, that's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, another thing Kathy did, this was like 19 days after the kidnapping, the FBI hauled her up to Madison, Wisconsin to view a lineup. Madison had, the Dane County sheriff had arrested someone the day before who had attempted to molest a little 9-year-old girl up there. So Kathy was hauled up there the very next morning to view a lineup that included this guy. And the lineup also included 4 fillers who were current prisoners of the Dane County Jail in Madison, Wisconsin. And lo and behold, Kathy picked out someone else as being identical to Johnny. And of course, this someone else certainly wasn't Johnny. He was very quickly alibied out. Even though he wasn't a good person, he was not a kidnapper or a murderer by any means. So once Kathy made that identification, by today's standards, she would be considered of no value as an eyewitness to the prosecution or the investigators anymore, because she had demonstrated that her memory of what the perpetrator looked like was no longer viable. And yet there she was, 53 or 54 years later, shown a photo lineup.
Wasn't her description, didn't it change as well? Wasn't it kind of, it didn't really fit Jack? Wasn't it about the teeth being different and the hair and all that too originally?
Yeah, the teeth, she had an upper right eye tooth that on alternate descriptions would either be there and then not be there. She described someone whose age was quite a bit older than Jack at the time. Jack was 18, and her initial description was 24 or 25. And over time, she was asked to give several descriptions. Over time, that range expanded to something like from as young as 20 to as old as 35. The gentleman she identified in Madison, Wisconsin, was, believe he was close to 35. I don't think he was actually that old, but that's almost twice what John Tessier's age was at the time. And of course, she said he was identical.
And he was quite a bit shorter than Jack as well.
Very much shorter.
Yeah, he was like 5'6", I think.
Yeah, 5'5.5", 5'4", whatever. Very close to that. And John Tessier was 5'10", 5'11" at the time. The other gentleman who the FBI thought very strongly could be it in the 3 or 4 days after the kidnapping was 30 years old, and he was also about 5'6" tall. So there were some strong physical differences between John Tessier and the descriptions Kathy was giving at the time.
Yeah, the night of the crime, I believe, when the police talked to her, was when she originally said he was missing the right eye tooth.
Yeah.
And since that is the freshest description post-crime, that would be the one that I would go with. And Jack never lost his right eye tooth. So
yeah, we have his an Army induction physical from 1962, which of course includes the dental portion. And the dental portion says he was missing no teeth in 1962.
So, did you ever come up with who you thought did it, or have an opinion on that?
There are two opinions. I'll let Jeff go first.
Okay. My opinion is that of the people that were looked at during the 1957 to 1958 original investigation, and I believe it was May of 1958, a man by the name of John Hilburn came to the attention of the police, and he worked for Quaker Oats up in Rockford. And when they went and looked at him, because he had just been convicted for molesting his 6-year-old daughter, they asked him about his whereabouts on that day. And he gave them the story that he had gone to visit his cousin in Rochelle, Illinois, which is it's a bit west and a bit south of Sycamore. And he had gotten lost on his way back, drove through Sycamore, and stopped and asked 2 little girls on that street corner how to get back to the highway. Now, understand, this is a 7 and an 8-year-old girl. I don't know anybody who has 7 and 8-year-old kids directions anywhere. So that set off some alarm bells in my head. And on top of that, when the Illinois State Trooper went to interview John Hilburn's cousin, he said that John Hilburn came to his place often. How do you get lost going home from a place you visit often? It just didn't make any sense. And he initially refused to take a lie detector test. And eventually he did take a lie detector test and passed. But, who knows if he had coaching or whatnot. Because it is possible, if you're prepared, to defeat a lie detector test, especially in those days. But at the same time, we'll never know for sure because he was put in a lineup and Kathy failed to identify him. But by this time, it's 6 months after the crime, and her memory is going to be absolutely useless at that point. So that's my opinion, is if anyone that they actually looked at was a viable suspect, to me, he's the most viable. Dennis believes a little different.
Yeah, I don't think Hilburn is the guy, but I'll concede if somebody comes up with some real strong evidence that he was. I used to think that this guy named Bill Kriego, who was a strong suspect a couple or 3 days after the kidnapping, had a real good chance of being the right person. He had a previous conviction for attempted molestation of a 13-year-old babysitter, and he had spent some time at Stateville Prison. And then after getting out, he had moved to another small town named Kingston, where he had continued to molest little girls in the neighborhood where he lived. And he was first, when he was first asked for information about where he was on December 3rd, he gave them a list of places where he was on December 4th. So when investigators started checking out, they found out, gosh, everything this guy has told us, or virtually everything he's told us, turns out not to be true. So he became a very strong suspect, and there was a lineup set up for December 7th, 4 days after the crime. And this was a face-to-face lineup with 5 people in it. And Kathy Sigman did not pick him out of the lineup, though she did say that he resembled Johnny, but he was different. His voice was different than what she remembered Johnny's voice as being. Johnny's voice, by the way, she had said was high and thin and sounded much more like her mother's than her dad's voice. But when Krigo gave his real alibi, when he remembered later, the things that he was doing did sort of check out, though his wife was a strong part of his alibi, which means it's not a strong alibi. But one of the members, or one of the guys who was a tavern owner in the small town where he was living, said that he was there at, I believe, 7 or 7:30 that night, and that pretty much sealed him as being a suspect. So I'm of an opinion now that the correct answer, looking at everybody who was investigated by the FBI or the ISP, Illinois State Police, after the crime, I think the answer is none of the above. We're looking for someone who's an absolute monster. When you look at the cause of death, at least 3 stabbings to the upper chest, that where the knife blade went all the way back to the backbone and left indentations. That's a monster. That's worse than someone who just plays around with young girls. That's much worse.
And also, one of the things that I've kind of come to believe too is that whoever did this with Maria, that wasn't their first time. When you study people that kidnap children and stuff, their first crime is always this panicked grab and dash, basically. Get them in the car and go. They don't talk with them. They don't hang out with them. They don't try and befriend them. They don't give them piggyback rides like this Johnny did. They're not that comfortable. And so I think this is someone who had been doing it for a while. And by this time, it was at least, I believe Maria was probably his 4th or 5th victim, which is another reason why I think it probably wasn't John Hilbert. So I'd have to agree with Dennis. It's probably someone we don't know and may never know.
Wow. So where do we go from here? What's going on with Jack now and his family members? Has he reconciled with any of the stepsisters, or what's going on now?
No, absolutely not. He has said, and he stated this again to me just a couple nights ago, that he will never forgive them. He said they tried to kill me, to put me in prison away for life as a former police officer and someone accused of murdering a little girl. That's almost a guaranteed death sentence. So he has no forgiveness for them. And I don't think they would ask it anyway. I think they still believe he did it. And, that's too bad, but it was too bad to begin with. I think what's going on with him now is, as I mentioned, he has settled with some of the agencies that put him in prison, and he's using that money to buy a new home somewhere else in the state of Washington, and he's basically starting a new life over. He's been happy to be out, and his family continues, his immediate family, his wife and his daughter Janie and Casey, they continue to support him, and he's enjoying his grandchildren.
Well, that's a good thing. Now, Dennis, just being from there, do you have any idea of what the town of Sycamore thinks? Later, of course, when he got convicted and then let out, is there things you hear about that come from the town one way or the other?
Yeah, John Tessier got away with this for 54 years, served 5-year sentence, and now he's getting away with it again. And I think that pretty well sums up the average attitude of the Sycamore resident, or at least the Sycamore residents who think about this, who are old enough to remember this.
Yeah, I think the city of Sycamore had its closure when he was convicted, and now it's reopened the wound, and they're not happy about that at all. So it's much easier for them to believe that he got away with it again.
Yeah, that certainly is the attitude of the surviving Ridulph siblings. There's only two now, Chuck and Pat are the only two remaining. And Chuck Ridulph was rather influential out there. That is almost certainly his attitude. I read his book, and he makes no bones about it. John Tessier is the guy who did this.
Well, it makes me wonder why the town is so set against him. Was he just not well liked, or his family not liked, or what do you think it is?
I wouldn't say the family wasn't well liked. I think everybody that I talked to who knew him, I did not know him, but everybody I talked to who did just considered him just very odd and very different. And maybe they were ready to accept whoever the police and the prosecution brought forward and said, this is the guy who did this. So my question is, what if they had brought somebody else up? Would they also have glommed down to whoever that somebody else was the way they glommed down to Jack as being the guy? I don't know. I think maybe they would have.
Yeah, I think that Chuck has his reasons for wanting closure, and I can understand that. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, our heart goes out to the Ridulph family. Our heart goes out to the city of Sycamore, because this was a horrible, horrible crime. There's no doubt about that. And whoever did it was absolutely a monster. And I think when you decide wholeheartedly that, whoever gets convicted for it, that he's the monster, it's kind of hard to give up your monsters.
Right, yeah. It kind of gets established. Now, do you guys have a website for this, or is it just for sale, and or is there a place that you want people to go on the internet to find it, or find you?
There is a website. It's aconvenientman.wordpress.com, and basically we've put investigative material and court transcripts and things like that up there. We do invite comments.
And if they want to buy it, probably the simplest is just go on Amazon. It's available in paperback and Kindle. Yeah. And there will be an audiobook coming out on it in the not too distant future through Audible.
Well, that'll be interesting. So what's next for you guys? What do you plan on doing? Are you following up with this case, or going to do another one, or are you guys going to retire?
Well, I'm probably going to be, I'll be looking at a few other cases. I'm still interested in true crime. I don't know that I will write that much more as far as a long involved book like this. This was a 5-year research project, and 5 years of our lives put into this book, and it's a little bit reflected in the size. It's pretty hefty tome. But I think I'm going to go on to some other nonfiction projects for a while.
Yeah, I'm done with this story. I think I've told it. I feel like I accomplished what I set out to do. It was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be initially, but it's done. And I don't know what I'm going to be moving on to. My wife's got a thriving business, and I keep the books for her, and that is keeping me very busy.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. How was it when you guys were doing the investigating and talking to people and stuff? Are people pretty receptive to it? Are they still pretty friendly to you when you go around questioning people, or was it still pretty tight?
Well, the ones that we were able to talk to were pretty welcoming. In particular, Richard Schmock was probably the one. He was the prosecutor, or not the prosecutor, the state's attorney that handled the case when his conviction was overturned. And after his review of everything, he agreed. He didn't fight it. He said, yeah, absolutely. There's no way this guy could have done it. And he's been very forthcoming and very generous with his time. And we can't do anything but thank him for that. Mm-hmm. As we said, the Ridulphs don't want to talk to anybody about it anymore, and neither do the Chapmans and, of course, the Tessiers. They have made no bones about they're not interested in talking. But there have been a lot of people that we have talked to about the case. Even when they disagreed with our findings, they were at least willing to talk to us, like Pam Long.
Pam Long, right.
And a couple other people that we've talked to. And they love to talk about it. I mean, for Sycamore, this is part of their identity.
People who have edited themselves into this story to the extent where a couple of them actually wound up on the witness stand presenting evidence against Jack McCullough at trial.
How is it going to work where cops can't change evidence, or detectives, I guess I should say, or can't manipulate things? Do you have any plan or anything that you can say to that?
Well, the one thing that I think should be made part of the case law is that when someone wrongfully convicts somebody, if there is actual changing of facts, hiding of witnesses, things that are definitely crossing the line, I think that until the person is released from prison, that's when the clock should start. Because right now, at the time of conviction, you only have 2 to 3 years, depending on what, 3 years in Illinois, to file charges against whoever convicted you. Well, as we've seen, it takes a minimum of 5 years to go through the appeals process. So, in essence, that 5 years is nothing. And how many people are in prison for 20 years because they were railroaded? I think that the clock should not start at the time of the conviction. It should start at the time that the conviction is overturned. That's number one thing. Then they face real consequences.
Yeah, I totally agree that the clock ran out in this case because of this 3-year statute of limitations. By the time a special prosecutor started looking at this, everybody who had done wrongdoing was scot-free. Except for the one lady from Seattle, because she lived out of state. But the special prosecutor said he could not get to a point where he could charge her with perjury, so she got away as well.
Yeah, so it really should be a matter of, because if you think about it, if someone was to kidnap you and they said, well, there's a 7-year statute of limitations on this. At 7 years and 1 day, if you escape then, they couldn't be prosecuted. That makes no sense. The way it works in kidnapping is until you're freed, it's an ongoing crime. And I think it should be considered that way with these jail sentences for people that are innocent. When the cops or the prosecution fudges things to make it work, that's what's reasonable. Is because to my mind, it's the same thing as kidnapping. I mean, you're kidnapped, but legally by the government until such a time as you get out.
Just another crazy case. Well, guys, I really appreciate you being here. The book we're talking about is The Convenient Man. Our guests have been the authors, Dennis Tomlinson and Jeffrey Dean Doty. Thank you for being here on the show.
Well, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.